Okay, so the first night is never usually that bad in any of the games, so I'll play through.
Horror games. We are all familiar with this type of genre. For example, Resident Evil, Amnesia.
I keep hearing these strange sounds coming from the kitchen. Holy shit! It's the Slender Man!
Slenderman, and Silent Hill. You also may have heard the different types of horror like survival horror, stealth horror, action horror, and perhaps the most highly regarded and misunderstood, psychological horror. But have you ever heard of mascot horror? It's a type of genre or subgenre that wasn't a big thing back in the day. Now it's blowing up almost every single week, with the biggest titles being Bendy and the Ink Machine, Poppy's Playtime, Spooky Jumpscare Mansion, and God forbid, Garden of Banban.
Bird up!
But you may ask yourself, what was the first mascot horror game? That being Five Nights at Freddy's. The original creator of the game, Scott Cawthon, was born in Houston, Texas on June 4th, 1978, and originally worked at a Dollar Tree as a cashier. This and many jobs is where he would be making a living for himself for a while, until he made Five Nights at Freddy's. This wasn't the first thing he's created. He used to be a part of an animation studio known as Hope Animation, a Christian animation studio that helped publish animations that would revolve around the stories of the Bible. And with them, he made an 8-part series called The Pilgrim's Progress, alongside with other animations such as A Christmas Journey, Bible Plays, The Jesus Kids Club, and that animation. We don't talk about that animation. He would also make a bunch of video games into the mix. First off, he would make games during the Flash game era like Rage Quit or Forever Quester. He even had more talent games like Fart Hotel. Okay. We also have Bad Waiter Tip Calculator, Pogo Duck, a strange amount of slot machine games, and Pimp My Dungeon. If we check out some of his most iconic games, however, a bit of a pattern starts to arise. Set and Survive, There Is No Pause Button, The Desolate Hope, and Chipper and Sons, which The Desolate Hope and Chipper and Sons being the biggest projects at the time. But they would get a lot of criticism saying that they were too mechanical and creepy. At this point, any normal person would have given up by now. But Scott Cawthon is not normal. Seeing the reviews for Chipper and Sons creepy, mechanical, horrific would make anyone depressed. And yet, for what his style truly is, Scott made a decision. He gave the world something to be really scared of.
But before that, hi, my name is Delta, and we will be diving into the first of Scott's line of FNAF games. Here we go!
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the show that, by my count, has had no less than...
No! We are not doing this! Get the hell out! Where was I? Oh yeah, right. Five Nights at Freddy's is a point-and-click survival horror that was originally released on July 23, 2014 on a website called Desura, which was a more welcoming place to anyone who wanted to post games that didn't get on Steam. It would tend to blow up in popularity, getting thousands of downloads, though Scott thought it'd be over by tomorrow. But then, on August 8th, 2014, ow! I hit my elbow! But then, on August 18th, 2014, it released on Steam.
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's.
What's up YouTube, what's going on? Corey Kinchin here and welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's!
Top of the morning to you ladies, my name is Jacksepticeye and welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's!
Hey everyone, Rosbowski here and welcome to something a little different. Today guys, we're gonna be playing a little bit of Five Nights at Freddy's.
Hey, what's happening everyone? This is Yummy Mash and welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's.
Five Nights at Freddy's was a success, breaking the internet by storm. But the question is, why was it so successful? Five Nights at Freddy's introduced a novel, intense gameplay experience. Players assumed the role of a night security guard in a haunted pizza restaurant, where animatronic characters got a bit quirky at night. The game's focus was on monitoring security cameras, conserving power, and surviving jump scare encounters, which provided a fresh and immersive horror experience. It capitalized on the primal fear of the unknown and the uncanny. The animatronic characters, their unpredictable behavior, and the limited resources provided a perfect recipe for building tension and delivering effective jump scares. One of Scott's favorite moments was the first jump scare for him and his two kids, Ian and Braden. Out of all the jump scares, Bonnie was the only one that got them all. Scott even mentioned how Bonnie was the scariest animatronic out of the characters. He mentioned how he was unsettling and startling just by the still image of him staring at you.
You know, and it was all Bonnie, which thrills me because Bonnie is kind of the only one that I think is a scary design for me. Like I've never had a nightmare about any of my own characters except for Bonnie. But yeah, I remember when I was developing the game at the time, Bonnie was just a still image and not an animated jump scare. I just had an image of Bonnie up in your face,
Yeah.
and that startled me. You know, I was flipping through the panels and stuff, and I was intentionally I was testing out the AI.
Yeah.
You know, I think I even had a little map showing me that there was a little red dot moving through the building.
Mhm.
But even though I was expecting it, I put down the monitor and there was Bonnie looking at me, and it
Oh,
was
God.
upsetting. You know, it was startling.
To explain the gameplay, there are 4 animatronics: Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. Your job is to survive the night from the animatronics while maintaining your power. But it gets more stressful the further you go along, having to get to 6 a.m. with as much power as you can. The sudden feeling of helplessness as you just stand there, watching them with such little time as they progress towards you. Your only hope is to survive. You even start to get attached to the only human contact you are ever given until you hear him die on the same night you are in. It's like a nightmare you're living. You feel hopeless, trapped, losing power, and isolated. It might seem weird that Five Nights at Freddy's was a new kind of horror game, but that's what a lot of the appeal was. Usually in modern horror games or AAA companies, they make them so that you have to face the monster, but instead the monsters come to you. Even Markiplier's most iconic FNAF 1 playthrough description reads, "No other game has given me a greater feeling of dread than this one. Five Nights at Freddy's is incredibly unique. It takes an approach to horror that I've never experienced before." That's high praise from someone who built a following playing horror games. It feels ripped straight out of the head of someone raised in the 90s, with their fears of animatronics manifesting in the most terrifying way possible. Terrifying way possible. I said it again. Most terrifying way possible. These fears have connected with many people as this small, basic indie horror game quickly became a monolithic success. Needless to say, Scott ultimately achieved a breakthrough. With the overwhelming success of FNAF 1, Scott Cawthon found himself facing a new challenge: how to create a sequel that would not only meet but exceed the expectations of the growing fanbase. Scott hastily began working on a sequel. However, tough times were ahead for Scott as he was already receiving hate mail for his newfound attention he was receiving. When anything gets popular, you are bound to get a plenty of bad apples in the mix. With this and his personal struggles he faced in his life, it took a toll on Scott.
That was a really stressful time for me, I think, because
Yeah.
obviously, you know, my life was changing a lot at that point. You know, there was just a lot of, there was a big frenzy going on with just all aspects of my life, and I was really trying to work on that. But I mean, they're still good memories.
Yeah.
But I just wouldn't want to revisit that. You know, it was really chaotic, and I was really stressed out. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, all good memories, but I wouldn't want to revisit it.
He persevered and released Five Nights at Freddy's 2 much earlier than fans suspected it to come out, on November 10th, 2014. The quick release of the game kept Five Nights at Freddy's interest at a high peak, but the game would relatively die off in obscurity rather than increase in popularity. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 takes a whole new direction of its atmosphere and gameplay. Scott describes how he planned the second game to be more chaotic than the first.
For like the overall feel of the games, like a lot of these were, I just kind of knew what they were supposed to be, or just kind of felt the way that the series should progress. Like I knew that part 2 should be chaotic. You know, part 2 should be, you know, a lot more chaotic than the first one. It should be just crazy. It should be overwhelming panic. And I knew that 2 should be kind of, 2 should be feel kind of industrial, which I think that does.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I'm not really sure. And maybe there was more to it at the time, but you know, it all happened so fast, you know.
The game is more complex, stressful, and unnerving, as they completely remove the doors and replace them with vents instead. Scott decided to have a much scarier setup. To survive, you have to let them in the office. What's fascinating is that despite the last game hiding the animatronics in the shadows and hiding in obscure angles, FNAF 2 takes a very different approach. You're supposed to stare at them dead in the eyes and have to maintain keeping Foxy at bay, with limited flashlight battery and hopefully warding him off. In terms of design, the animatronics are far more intense than they are in the first game. While FNAF 1 focuses on the uncanny of the mostly normal looking bots, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 has the withered animatronics. The way they look, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, they aren't dead or alive. They're walking corpses. The toy animatronics are far less scary, but almost resemble the feeling of the Chipper and Sons characters, with the exaggerated faces and bright colors. Another main role it has is that it's now telling a story. For example, every animatronic has a reason they look the way they are. The toy animatronics are an overcorrection to make the business seem more family-friendly. The withered animatronics are the old ones being torn apart and retrofitted for the next location to open. And we're given a character that is made for plot purposes, the puppet. While most animatronics are just there to be your tormentors, and even ones like Golden Freddy were just added originally as an Easter egg, the puppet's role in the plot is defined and specific. With this being, the puppet, Scott is committing to making a story, and a brand new piece of the fandom grew wildly: the theorists. And in Scott's efforts to craft a story, the direction of the series as a whole was quickly changing. The death minigames are something that FNAF 2 and 3 share, and the message they have is important. Even though the animatronics are trying to kill you, in the story of the games, they are actually the victims. The puppet is shown as a good guy trying to give the children that were murdered life. Despite the results of it being a bit less ideal, what the difference between Five Nights at Freddy's 2 and 3 is, however, is that the antagonist of the story and the gameplay merge together.
But hey, that's just a theory. A game!
Get the fuck out!
Hey, my name is... Five Nights at Frederick's III, or FNAF 3, is an indie horror game made on March 2nd, 2015, and I personally have some experience playing it. The setting of Five Nights at Freddy's 3 takes place after the events of 1 and 2 at least, with you working in some horror-themed attraction called Fazbear Frights. Your job is the same as the first 2 games, but there's a twist to it now. Five Nights at Freddy's had many threats to be worried about, but in this instance, there is only one threat to the whole game, and that is Springtrap. Your goal is to lure him away from your office by playing some audio around the area that he is near. If you fail to do so, he'll either stare at you from the glass window in front of you, or the open doorway next to you, giving you a malicious smile. While there are phantom animatronics, these are hallucinations, and ones that don't even kill you. When it comes to this game, there's just one antagonist in the game. Every night you beat, plot is shown through minigames, giving clues to find the good ending of the game. The plot usually being really undefined events taking place in arcade games, mostly leaving it to us, the players/community, to figure everything out. This is the first, but not the last FNAF game that claims to be the end, and this one has 3 different ones. The bad ending follows if you beat the game the normal way, going through all the nights and stopping as is at night 5. You see, after surviving each night, there are minigames showing the purple guy attacking and disassembling each of the animatronics in an attempt to kill off the souls inside. On night 5, we play as one of the souls and work together with the others to scare him into putting the golden bodysuit where the spring locks fail, slowly killing him in the process, but not truly. The neutral or secret endings play after beating Nightmare Mode, which is simply showing us a newspaper that the attraction of Five Nights at Freddy's 3 mysteriously burned down. We can assume this was done to try and kill off Springtrap, who's trapped inside that suit for years. And yet, it was shown later in the games that he was still alive, to where he gets the famous line,
"I always come back."
Finally, the good ending is designed specifically for the theorist side of the community, with hidden puzzles on every single minigame and night. Things like codes and hidden pathways through minigames slowly reveal a story of trapped children. These souls stuck inside the animatronics want to be freed, and through our efforts. At the very end of the game, we do just that. We're shown a screen of the main 4 cast from the first FNAF game, telling us that we've freed the lost souls haunting this franchise. But we're not sure what the true ending is on this trilogy.
Given a lot of thought as to whether or not I should answer this question.
Okay.
And I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And the answer is very interesting.
Okay.
The answer is very interesting. The answer is complex.
Okay.
However, I'm not going to answer it because it's only going to cause strife. I mean, you see the kind of trouble that erupts, especially several years ago. The flame wars that would go on over Mangel's gender, something as simple as that. You know.
yeah.
You know, I mean, people with torches and pitchforks. You know. No, I don't think I'm going to answer this one, I'm afraid.
Other than that, the storyline finally comes to an end. Originally, this was Scott's final FNAF game, ending it with a trilogy, but criticisms with the third game bother him, as people complained that the jump scares were not scary or weak, alongside with the difficulty being too easy to beat unlike the previous games.
I think when I was making that game, in my mind, that was the end of a trilogy. You know, I think in my mind, the story was going to be 3 games. And in all honesty, I think Five Nights at Freddy's 3 was where I kind of started letting myself be driven a little bit more by criticisms of the game than maybe I had before. Before, everybody was just really, really excited, you know, happy to have all this stuff. But whenever 3 came out, I really was starting to pay attention to criticisms. You know, for instance, you know, even though I may have, you know, in some, you know, alternate life, may have left the series alone at 3, people were not happy with the jump scare, and it's kind of as simple as that. People weren't happy with the jump scare of Springtrap, and that really bothered me. And so then that kind of, in my mind, that wouldn't let the series rest in a way, because I wanted to make another entry that was really, really scary again.
Scott took these criticisms for granted and wanted to make another entry to the franchise to end it on a high note, and thus, he made, if not, the scariest game of the franchise. William Snifton. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is a nightmare of a game, and that's not even metaphorically. You are actually in a nightmare. Sort of. It goes from having these uncanny animatronics in the first game to these torn, monstrous illusions that haunt you every night. You play as a child in your bedroom, moving around from place to place, something never seen before in the game series, with possibly the most terrifying game mechanic so far. Instead of the wall of darkness just occupying the space around you, you have to stare into it, and then you have to listen, ever so gently, to hear if the animatronics are breathing right in front of the door. Either way, you have to commit and make a choice quick, and this made the game stand out for that reason alone.
Oh! I didn't do any breathing! Oh!
Yeah, well, lots of the games were kind of experimental with different ways of initiating, you know, the jump scare to see what was really effective. And yeah, I think looking into, you know, this big dark chasm in front of you, not knowing if there's a face, you know, 2 inches from your own face looking back at you, and you having to commit to turn on the flashlight, and then you're, you know, I think that one really worked. I think that one really worked.
Also, we gotta mention the fact that the game has dialogue now. Wait a minute. They talk? Since when? Like, I get there's some vague instructions in mini games, and Balloon Boy laughs and all that, but this thing talks. That right there, that talks. In fact, there's a whole lot of talking in FNAF 4. Before, we knew they were sentient and were ghosts and all that garbled nonsense. But there was always a barrier. Scott communicated these messages through codes, through tiny bursts of information, just enough to get the mind rolling. We were studying moving hieroglyphics telling tales of tragedy and suffering at the hands of a purple-sniffing menace. The moment words came out of these animatronics' mouths, what the series became was far beyond horror with obscure story elements. This is now a narrative horror game. However, the gameplay and story are still separated. For now. From the first 4 nights, you deal with the original cast that you are familiar with. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. You're getting used to the new mechanics. But then, night 5 comes along.
Hey! What the fuck? Okay!
Scott threw a curveball at the players. We were prepared for one last night, assuming it'd be a really hard challenge, and it was. Nightmare Fredbear completely changes the entire game plan. You know what to listen for on which door he is going to by the sounds of his fainted footsteps, and you have to go to that door and shut it as fast as possible. If you're too late, well, you die, of course.
I didn't do anything! I didn't even do anything! What the fuck?
He also laughs, a sign of him being on your bed or in your closet. Once you beat Night 5, you're shown probably one of the most shocking minigames in the franchise. After being tormented for the past 4 days by your brother, he forcefully picks you up alongside his friends as they bring you to your biggest fear in the animatronics. Back then, it was Fredbear and Spring Bonnie running the show. Your anxiety is through the roof. Your brother thinks it's funny and a good idea to put you inside the animatronic's mouth as some kind of prank to add on to. As you try to squirm out of this tight space, the mouth shuts with a loud crunch in the end, and history was made.
Was that the bite of 87?
In fact, that was not the bite of 87. You see, in the previous minigames, there's a TV you can turn on and it reads, Fredbear and Friends, 1983. Something has changed. The entire story was finally being solved, but this caused more questions from the fans. Even after beating Night 7, you're shown a box in a pitch black room with 2 padlocks. You try your best to open it, but then you get hit with the darkest quote of the game. Perhaps some things are best left forgotten, for now. This changed FNAF entirely, from the controversy of the bite to the mystery of the box. This led to even bigger criticisms.
Kind of like with Five Nights at Freddy's 3, where there was something I was kind of left unsatisfied with. The reaction to Five Nights at Freddy's 4, and the box is tied into this, very, very closely. I don't think that people weren't really happy from a lore standpoint, even though I got the jump scares kind of right, and the box really fit into that lore aspect. I felt that it had all gone kind of it had strayed too far from an actual story in a way. Me just saying that, I'm going to get torn apart for even saying that, because people are going to look at what I've ended up with. They're going to be like, and you call this a story? But in Five Nights at Freddy's 4, it kind of went a little too broad. It cast its net too wide for interpretation. I guess that's the best way to say it. It went too broad for interpretation, and that left people unsatisfied. Because whereas the other ones, there were mysteries. 4 ended up just too mysterious to the point where you really couldn't, there was no real way to figure out what was going on. And it left people unsatisfied. And like I said, with jumping from 3 to 4, I knew that I had to go in and straighten that out. It's like, people aren't really happy with this. I need to make another game. I need to kind of ground this again, not necessarily in reality, but I need to ground it in kind of storytelling again, and really lay this down with what's going on. Obviously I watch all the game theory videos, and me and Matt have sometimes had an antagonistic relationship back and forth. I inconvenience him with my games, and sometimes he inconveniences me with his theories, but it's all in good fun, But I'll tell you, he did a video on that box, and he kind of said that he thinks the contents of the box changed over the years, and I bet nobody gave that a whole lot of thought, but I saw that and I was like, he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. The contents of that box have changed over the years, because it's for that very reason. It's because of what I was intending the game to be when it happened, and then after the reaction of it, I was like, I need to craft this into something better for the people who see this as important. and that kind of indirectly does change the contents of the box, because it changes the contents of everything that came before. So I just thought that was an interesting observation on his part.
A couple of months later, after the release, Scott announced that there was going to be a DLC. Think of it as extra content for this game. There's nothing much to it, just new skins, cheats, extra modes, and Night Marionette. Huh? Aside from that, this is the last FNAF game that Scott will ever make. It even says on the first teaser, saying that this is the final chapter. Wait, Scott made more of them?